Hey, Wade.
Hey, Rob. How do?
Doing good. How about you? Cheers to another episode of Magic.tv. Got your coffee? You got your stogie?
I I do actually. I've got a fat stack of cappuccino over here.
That's the Godfather cappuccino. Got me a nice cup of Death Wish here. And tonight's episode is another episode of Rob and Wade Presents. For those of you who don't know, there is Magic.tv where we formally interview amazing talents in occultism. People like Naomi, people like Dr. Puka, people like Lon, people like Jack Grail. And then there's Rob and Magic.tv Presents, where Rob and Wade are the only ones there. We talk about topics, spitball, have a good time. And of course, there are the upcoming independent episodes of Rob's Rants and Reviews. That's just Rob talking alone, talking shit. And Wade's Workshop, where Wade's going to pretty much just share whatever the hell Wade shares when he gets around to doing it.
Fun stuff.
What do you think? What's the hat? Do we use the hat for these segments, or I throw it away?
It's a little small.
Well, that's the biggest they got because I got a big head.
I know, right? I got a gigantic. I got like an 8 3/4. Trying to find hats for that is insane.
Exactly. And for those of you who keep asking me, no, my dear friend Bob Freeman is not my father. Okay, people have asked me that because they thought that like I'm his abandoned son somewhere because of him being into tarot and occult investigation. But no, he's a good friend, and I would have loved to have a guy like him as a father. That would be like the Confederate general father or something like that. But no, he's not my father, but he's a great friend. All right, tonight we're talking about shadow work. It's a nice chill episode. And dark work, more importantly, not shadow work, fuck shadow work, because you know why? There's enough of these green smoothie yoga girls talking about it and not knowing the time of day. We're talking about dark.
Brief thing about shadow work.
Yeah.
Is most of the time when people are talking about shadow work, they're not talking about shadow work. They'll come up with like, don't mess with my kids or you're going to see my shadow side. Mm-hmm. And of course, to them, the shadow is always, swords and fists and badassery. But the thing is that your shadow is the parts of yourself that you don't want to acknowledge. The parts of you that's a coward. The parts of you that's a liar. The parts of you that's just 31 flavors of dog shit.
Or
that's the stuff that people don't ever want to do.
Or the parts of you that are gentle. The parts of you that are soft. Especially in this testosterone-driven world.
Oh,
we can't be soft. We can't
alpha males.
We gotta be Joe Rogan, manosphere. No.
God.
You know what I mean? I mean, as a father, no way.
Yeah. But a lot of people, they talk about shadow work, but they haven't actually done any.
Yep.
And the thing is, once you start going, doing your abyss work to make your crossing, it's gonna come up, and you can't hold it off any longer. That's the thing. Is it becomes part of you, and you have to acknowledge that. And the worst part is, it's not just your shadow in this life. It's the shadow part of your entire soul, which is all of your lives. And you have to look at, in this life, you were just a junkie. You used to rob old ladies. This life, you were a child molester. This life, you were just you just went around killing people. Or this life, you were a thief, and you cheat people, and the stuff that people never want to talk about actually doing, or even wanting to acknowledge about themselves. So that's a whole other thing of shadow work. There's a great book on it. I can't think. It's called Owning Your Own Shadow, and it's Robert something. Anyway,
first name.
We'll do a whole other thing on shadow work.
A lot of people like to ask me, though, what's the value of shadow work? Okay, and because a lot of people are trying to offer fringe crap shadow work programs. Crap. They're just trying to ride the wave and make more money off it. But the first thing I like to tell people is you cannot mistake your shadow for the difference between darkness and light. Because your darkness could be your light. That there's a term in shadow work called the white shadow. And that's example like a battle-hardened Spartan, right? He's a warrior. He's Leonidas. He kills, he fights, he protects, right? So if people think that violence is shadow work, then he's a shadow master. But no, in the case of the Spartan, his shadow will be gentleness, forgiveness, kindness, compassion. You see what I mean? So with that, it's basically
his shadow will be the coward that ran away from the field, or that surrendered. You know,
that's true. That's true. In fear, because another thing to consider is that in my studies of shadow work, the inner child can be very much overlapped and conflated with the shadow. It is not the shadow, but since we tend to repress our inner child, it gets relegated to the other shadow shit we're dealing with. You know what I'm saying? And then now we got to do with both, and those are both very powerful things. And I like to tell people that the value of working with your shadow is this. If you see in the movie X-Men First Class, which is one of the last good X-Men movies, there was a scene where Mystique, Jennifer Lawrence, was in her Jennifer Lawrence form, and she was lifting weights. And Magneto caught the weight, and he said, if half your attention is used to look like that, then it only means half of your attention is doing whatever you're doing. And then he dropped the weight on her. And right when he dropped it, she turned into her blue form. In other words, if we are only looking at our light, we are only tapping in to half of our potential.
Well, yeah, it would actually be less than that, because we're spending extra energy to maintain the illusion for ourselves.
Exactly.
That's the worst kind of lie. You can lie to anybody, but you cannot lie to yourself without doing extensive damage.
You can't lie to yourself.
As magicians, the things we say tend to become true.
Yep.
That's kind of the whole part of being a magician, is that you say something and it happens. So if you go around and you're telling a bunch of lies, so if you go and you're telling a bunch of lies, especially to yourself, it's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm. But on that note, congratulations on your $1 billion. May you spend it wisely.
I'll just throw it in the pile. I think they're going to have a Scrooge McDuck every now and then, just roll around in the big pile of money.
But going back to it though, one thing that I don't like when I talk to some pseudo shadow workers are the people who come from the approach that the shadow is something that needs to be forgiven. Think about that. They'll use terminologies like, oh, I have forgiven my shadow. I have reaccepted it. And now I forgive it for what it's done wrong. That's like tantamount, to going up to a friend who's a homosexual and telling them, I forgive you for being gay. My homosexual friend's going to knock me upside the head because there's nothing wrong with being gay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the shadow, it does what it does. That's what it's for. Mm-hmm. We have this inflated image of ourselves with, it's like if you're looking at an approval rating, we always have to keep it above the baseline. Mm-hmm. So we have to keep our approval up there so we can feel good about ourselves. But really, we're baseline.
True.
However far up we are, our shadow is that far below in the disapproval. And the more full of yourself you are, the more you're holding back. Because really, it's like when they say about karma, good karma, bad karma. The best karma is no karma at all, because that's what tends to pull you off your path one way or the other. Mm-hmm. So with your shadow work, if you're the more you repress your shadow, the further you get away from your baseline.
And one thing I don't like, brother, especially this, because I'm vocal about this now. People don't know is that these wrongly rhetoric white lighters send out a wrong understanding of what the shadow is. I mean, I tell this to people openly. My previous marriage was ruined because of wrongly rhetoric white lighters. They got into my ex-wife's head, and I forgive her for that. But the people who did that, may they burn in hell. And here's the thing. They're the ones who's pushing the narrative that the shadow is bad, the darkness is bad, and only light should prevail. But you know what I tell people? If that's the case, you're missing out on a fundamental part of society that every single nation you go to has actually an entire organized division of shadow workers that keeps the country safe. You know what it's called? The military. The military are dark workers. Why? Because they are trained to kill. They're trained to kill.
Here's a fun thing. Someone had posted there's a silly meme about, oh yeah, well, do what thou wilt, and some of the other person is like, oh, you mean and it harm none, right? Then just poker face.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, what if your will involves harming people? And someone came back, spoiler alert, it doesn't. And I thought it might. If your true will is you're a guardian, or
Father.
And even in an abstract sense, say if you're going out and you're growing crops, well, you have to harvest at some point.
Yep.
If you're raising animals for food, you have to slaughter animals at some point. But you cannot live without harming something.
True, and not only that too. Let's just go to fundamentals here too. If my true will is to keep my children safe, if need be, I will kill for them.
Mm-hmm.
Try to hurt my kids, F around and find out. It's a non-negotiable. Yeah. Even as a father, I have already kind of taken it upon myself that I'd even give my life for anyone's child because I know how precious children are. When they grow to be adults, they become assholes, but when they're kids, they're innocent. So if I saw a child that's life was in danger, I would give my own life for that child because that child deserves a chance to live. And if that means that it's shadow work, then by all means. But people are missing out on the fact too that like the darkness, the shadow and stuff like that, I think it's been given a bad rap. Like I remember I pulled a fast one on a lot of these green smoothie people here once because I said, what would you say about an ascended master, a spiritual master, who got so angry one time that he got violent? And they were like, oh, that's not a sign of ascension. He is low vibration if he has to tap into anger. He obviously doesn't know. He's not a true ascended master. I said, really now? Really?
So if he took a horsewhip to the money changers?
Yeah, in the Bible, where Jesus roid raged when they turned his temple into a marketplace. You see what I mean? I think Jesus was teaching us then that anger is a human emotion. It's not bad. It's not good. It is human. Okay? And
it's a developed response to aggression.
Exactly. So I think people need to stop trying to filter out parts of themselves that is normal. That's why, like, if you ask me, one of my favorite books on the truest and the highest form of shadow and dark work, The Benighted Path by Richard Gavin. Because I don't know if you got to read that one, but he really just says deep within each human being is a monster, okay? Whether we like it or not. And we need to agree that that is fundamentally part of who we are. And until we come to terms with the fact that that's part of who we are, we will never be given that power that the monster is holding back. For whatever reason it could be, okay? For whatever rhetoric you say it follows. And here's another thing I've noticed too, because I identify as a dark worker. I remember when I was still married, my ex-wife used to tell me all the time, you're a light worker. She was like Oprah giving away cars, talking to everyone, you're a light worker and you're a light worker. And there were people who would come to me in my class and say, I don't resonate as a light worker. And I say, yeah, don't fuck that shit. You're a dark worker. Okay? There's a dark worker? Yes, there is. Let's let it out. Let's tell the people. Because a dark worker is not somebody who will just go with the flow. A dark worker is somebody who will be proactive and try to change things themselves, even if it means breaking the rules, even if it means cracking some skulls. Case in point, Batman. That's a good example of a dark worker. Okay. What I like about dark workers, though, bro, and I've seen this here in the Philippines, especially, they are 100 times more effective at getting shit done than the light workers. More effective.
Well, that's the thing is that when there's a problem that comes up, I mean, to quote the illustrious Dr. Peter Venkman, shit happens. Someone's got to clean it up, and who you're going to call?
True. And here's another thing.
That's the thing is that the world is messy.
Yeah.
The world needs people. It needs harvesters. It needs janitors. It needs people to keep the streets open. Because even if like when you get an uncrossing spell is not necessarily to undo a curse that's on you. It's just like sometimes your hair gets messed up and you got to brush it out. So sometimes life gets messy and you have to undo all the tangles. Someone's got to do it.
That's very true, brother. And you know, another thing I wanted to share with you on this, I wanted to ask you this. Would you consider democracy more light work or more dark work?
That's, well, see, the thing is there that democracy is a tool. And I forget who first said it, but they said that straight democracy always inevitably leads to a populist dictator.
Exactly.
Which is kind of what we're looking at now. Mm-hmm. But having the democracy itself, like getting a consensus, mm-hmm. I don't know if it's necessarily light work or dark work, but it's right-hand path.
Right-hand path. Okay, I'll take that.
It's right-hand path, which is not necessarily light or dark. There's a distinction, but right-hand in the sense that it is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But we're getting a lot of sci-fi references going on here today. But the dissolving the individual will into the collective will.
Okay, because one thing I've observed too is this. One of the reasons why dark work gets shit done faster than light work. Those who are following the light work path most of the time want to please everyone. And in doing that, it takes fucking forever. It's like we have not moved forward because we haven't even agreed what time we're going to meet. Versus the opposite. If you Dr. Doom that shit and says, all right, motherfuckers, we're meeting at 5. I don't care what you think, but this meeting needs to happen. It mm-hmm. gets done. People may think, oh, that's Dr. Doom. He's not doing it right, but he still got the job done versus you trying to make everybody happy in the process. Another example, in times of war, you want to see one of the most effective systems in getting shit done, look at the military. If we are under attack from another nation, they will set up systems that we may not like, but to make sure that we are defended, fed, and taken care of, which mm-hmm. we could not do democratically. You get what I'm saying?
Well, the Romans, in times of war, Roman city-states used to appoint one guy as just like a supreme chancellor to kind of coordinate all the, everything in the city, all the functions, the military, the defenses. And then it was assumed that when the crisis was over that he would step down. And it happened for the longest time until, Caesar and all that.
Well, I guess it's a double-edged sword because, absolute power corrupts absolutely. But at the same time, too, one thing about dark work is I like to tell people the things you're most ashamed of can actually be some of your greatest strengths. Did you know that? Like for example, if you told me right now, Wade, Rob, I got a big problem. I'm really lazy. I think that's my shadow. I think it's my darkness that I'm super fucking lazy. I would say, you're not lazy. You're efficient with your energy. Because if you really wanted to do something, you would do it. But it means that anything that's been offered to you right now is not justifiable for you to use energy. You see what I mean? So I like to tell people sometimes that like shadow work, anger, these things are actually expressions of self-love. Think about it. That you're protecting yourself. You're saying, no, wait, me first. But of course, in society, we've been kind of like stirred towards thinking that thinking only of yourself at first is selfish. You know what I mean? So they want you to pour from an empty cup. What do you think about that, brother?
Well, I mean, by definition, thinking only of yourself is selfish, or thinking of yourself first is selfish. But, the idea that selfish somewhere along the way became automatically bad, that you're not ever supposed to think of yourself first. But yeah, like you're talking about pouring from an empty cup, you adjust your own oxygen mask before adjusting, for getting them on your kids. Because if you don't take care of yourself, no one else is going to take care of, everyone else. So you have to act for yourself to maintain your own strength and effectiveness, and then you can help other people.
It's actually funny that you mentioned the thing about the oxygen mask, because that was actually tested. And apparently they found out that those mere seconds that you use putting on your kid's mask first can actually kill you.
Yeah.
And that becomes a bigger problem. So that's why I say, save yourself first. And at the same time, though, I like to say when it comes to dark work, if you want to see people, first and foremost, in their most rawest form, ask them to show you their shadow. Because if they're showing you their shadow, they don't have much to hide anymore. If they're, okay, my shadow is, I'm a lustful motherfucker. I like fucking like crazy. Okay. So you crave, you're obviously into intimacy. You told me that. I know that. It's a lot better that I know that off the bat, that that's the kind of person you are, than find it out later on and find out, holy shit, you're a fucking maniac. Like, good example. Years ago, when I lived in the province, there was this one guy, God bless him. He's a good friend of mine, actually a relative. And I used to call him a pig. Why? Because like every other freaking night, he had a different chick. And I'm like, you are a fucking pig. You know what I mean? You're objectifying this woman. You are beneath me. He was open about it, but that's how I am. I fuck around. I'm like, you fucking asshole. I never liked him at first, right? And then a couple months later, I met this guy who had this energy to him like he was some sort of ascended, self-actualized guru type, right? And me and some of my students were like, this guy's amazing. You know what I mean? He's like Gandhi or something like that. And we were all enthralled by his image until we found out that after he would see us, he'd go to the red light district and get underage women. And that broke my heart, but it did something that night that I really liked, which was I went to the first guy, the one who was like blatantly a pirate. And you know what I said to him? I said, you know what? You're a pirate, but you were honest about it all along. And I appreciate you more for that because I knew you were a pirate and you never hit it. And I can't fault you for it. Now, this other asshole, he was acting like some sort of saint when in fact he was a monster. And that's the scary part, because in our class in defense of occultism last night, I was actually sharing how sometimes these cult leaders really at first will want to portray themselves as something transcendental, that they're so pure, they're so ascended, they're so enlightened. But usually that's the biggest wolf in sheep's clothing. Like, good example, look at what happened to John of God in Brazil. Did you hear about that one?
Mm-mm.
Well, basically, there was this guy, and he had like this huge land reservation in Brazil, and people were going to him left and right because he said he had mystical healing powers. It even got to Oprah. Oprah even featured it, and people would go there and they'd say they'd get healed from their cancer, their illnesses. So everybody thought he was a modern saint until 365 sexual harassment cases were filed against him. 4 of them his own children. You see what I mean? And then that's disgusting. He portrayed himself as something holy when he was actually something sinister. And then you have the likes of, example, Anton LaVey, who was open about it all the time, saying, hey, I told you we'd do sex magic. Like, I never said that I was a saint. You know what I mean? So the biggest question is, what's the bigger evil? The devil you know in Anton LaVey, or the devil you don't in John of God? You see what I mean? I'll take Anton any time of the day.
Well, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's one thing, like you're saying, it's one thing to lie to other people, but I'm pretty sure John of God was also lying to himself. Mm-hmm. I'm sure he had all the reasons in the world that he just like, well, I'm saving these women's souls, I'm purging my demons, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Anything other than just daddy wanted some strange.
That pretty much. Now, here's the next thing I want to ask you, bro. What are some of the greatest things that dark work can achieve if it's fully channeled and unleashed?
Well, they ended World War II with it.
Ooh.
There was a book called The Magical Battle of Britain. Beyond Fortune was actually in on it, but there was all of the covens in England were united, just basically bombarding Hitler with this browbeating energy that you cannot come to England. Mm-hmm. You cannot come here. And it was 22 miles across the thing, and he couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. But they basically shut him down. I mean, there was a lot of lodges that were, a lot of covens. The Golden Dawn was in on it, and everybody was in on just shutting him down. But shut him down.
I'm curious, what role did Uncle Al play in all of that? Because I know he got kicked out of Italy.
I don't know specifically what he did. I don't know if he was in with the Golden Dawn workings, or if he had gone off with the OTO stuff by that time. There was, I think he appointed Garmer after the war to be the Caliph, or to be the next, his successor in the OTO. And if my history serves me correctly, I believe that Garmer was the one that just about let the order die before Grady took over.
Now, here's a question I wanted to ask you. You're, of course, familiar with Star Wars, right?
I'm a giant nerd. Yes, I'm familiar with Star Wars.
We're both giant nerds, brother. Now, here's the question I want to ask you. Palpatine, you would consider the Wizard King, don't you think? He's the Wizard
What's
King.
That?
Palpatine, the Emperor?
Oh, yeah.
He's the Wizard King, right? He was a Sith Lord. He mastered the dark side. He took over the government. He became the ruling power with both the Force and the government. Now, the question I'm going to ask you is this. Do you think that could ever happen in the real world where, like, there would be a Wizard King, like somebody who is, like, neck deep into the occult and uses it to ascend to power like that?
You mean like the Dalai Lama?
Yeah, ish, but he's not ruling the world, dude. He's kind of limited in his power. I'm talking about like.
But I mean, in his not ruling the world, but Tibet is the only existing magocracy in the world, which I think is great, and it's been the same guy for about 1,000 years, which is really cool. I mean, you know how the whole thing works with the reincarnate, doing the red rite of reincarnation. That he comes back, the Panchen Lama holds a fort until he comes back around, and they just sort of. But yeah, it's the same guy has been running this country for 1,000 some odd years, which is pretty cool.
Until China took over.
Well, thing is, he's still ruling in excess. China has, what was it? They said that they wanted to outlaw reincarnation, so they want to be able to pick the next. Yes, they want to outlaw reincarnation.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
They want to be able to pick the next Dalai Lama, and you're like, dude, these guys have their own method for selecting the next Dalai Lama, and he's going to choose where he goes. So it's like you can't. I mean, you can say this guy's the Dalai Lama, and the real Dalai Lama will stand up. That's just he'll come around, and people aren't going to acknowledge China's hand-picked Dalai Lama. It's just not going to happen.
But back to the question, do you really ever think that something like that could be possible? That like somebody who's really trained in magic can use it to ascend to power, like a presidency in the world, or like the head of the UN or something like that?
Well, that's what they say the Antichrist is supposed to be.
Wow. A mage?
So
wouldn't that be scary?
Yeah, he has like supernatural power, and that he supposedly survives a grievous head wound. Not a fake one like they had in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's like I'm curious about that because I think it's only a matter of time, but the person would need to be very much versed in not just the magical side of things, but the political side of things.
You need no politics.
Yeah, because somebody, let's say, as brilliant as, let's pull somebody out of the hat, like Stephen Skinner. He's a brilliant guy, but I don't think he would know how to play the Game of Thrones to get up there to use that. That's a different level of brilliance in itself.
Well, here's the thing, and this is why I brought up the Dalai Lama. I was, to go back to the whole thing of a populist dictator. Now, to use an example completely from fiction, there's this comic book about a guy named Drumpf.
Okay.
No relation to anything in reality, but he likes to divide people, to set people against each other so he can continue what he's doing, and they're all fighting while he's taking. The thing that got me about it was that I was sitting there back when Bernie was still doing the thing, when he was still in the running back in 2015. And I was like, God, this guy would be like everything that everybody wants to have happen. And I realized how dangerous that is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wait a minute. Whoever is going to take over, really take over and mean it, is going to be someone that everybody gets behind. Not someone that has to divide people so he can stay in power while they're, over the chaos. Someone who can get everybody on board. He's going to be a great speaker. He's going to have something for everybody. You're like, okay, you like legal weed? You get legal weed. You want guns? You got guns. Gay marriage? Have at it. You want to have abortions? Fine. You want to have 50 kids? Do it. You want free health care? Everybody gets free health care. And little American flags to put on your car. And, did I say America? My bad. But the thing is, I looked at that like, God, that would be a person I would vote for forever.
Mm-hmm.
And if he decided that when he got everyone behind him, he's just like, you know what? Let's make this the United States of Earth. Everybody would be on board.
And everybody
and
would
that's a little scary. A little crazy, too.
Like, here's one thing I'd like to ask you, like a what if. What if somebody like Elon, who's doing everything he's doing, is actually secretly an occultist? Wouldn't that be dangerous?
I think if he was an occultist, he'd be a lot more effective at this. Because everything that he's been able to do is just because he's got money.
Mm-hmm.
And he's made the right connections with specific people, but he's doing everything so poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's taunting people on, he's not, an occultist would basically be able to bring everyone into the sway. He would have that glamour.
You're saying that like Elon lacks charisma, which I totally agree.
Exactly.
All right. So basically,
if it was a real magician exercising act, you would probably never even know his name. He would be the guy that's giving the marching orders to all these other people while he sits in his beach house sipping margaritas and waiting for the phone to ring.
Yeah, probably shows to us the extent of really who is pulling the strings, because I saw this one video, and I don't want to mention his name, but there's this one influencer who I don't want to give any platform to, and somebody interviewed him and said, who is really behind, if you knew who was pulling the strings, who's really the one calling the shots? And you could see that he didn't even want to say it. He was just like, he wouldn't say it. And this is for, and again, I don't want to mention who it is, but this individual is very vocal, even toxically vocal at times. But he wouldn't say who is calling the shots, or who he believes is the one pulling all the strings. And it really makes you wonder, like, who is the Darth Sidious behind all of this? Because I still think that like Elon, these are still like guys who are just in the forefront. They're not the masterminds. There's something more powerful there. And I almost guarantee you that somebody that powerful would be foolish to discount the power of the occult. You know what I mean? If you got someone who controls and gives the marching orders to putting Diddy into jail, or who Elon will listen to, who presidents will listen to discount the power of magic would be foolhardy. Simple as that.
Well, yeah, I mean, Reagan married a witch.
Mm-hmm.
And she continued to do her thing while he was in the White House and everything. And people they'll overlook a lot of things, if it's my guy doing it. So if they're saying, well, I'm a Christian, I don't support this. Oh, this guy's got a lot of spiritual power behind him. Well, oh yeah, I know that the angels are working with him. They'll justify it any way they want.
Especially if
if they openly know. If the guy could come out on the balcony of the White House and do a ritual in front of cameras on live TV, they would still find a way to justify it.
True, the double standard is present, but it does make me wonder, like that shadow figure we talked about, that shadow leader. which there's a good chance somebody like that does exist. Makes me really wonder also, who would he be working with in our industry? What kind of...
You know, the fun thing is, it's like when we talked about the tzaddikim, sometimes they don't even know who they are. Sometimes they'll just casually say something. Oh, if I was president, I would do this. And then it happens. They could be consciously doing it or not consciously doing it. Maybe the people that are actually in power don't know they're being controlled. And that's the whole thing about magic, is that you have the ability. I mean, your reach is global.
Yeah.
Absolutely global. You could manipulate people anywhere. And it's really all about the manipulation of key figures in different positions of power. They may not even know they're being manipulated. So the kingpin you're talking about could be literally anybody.
Because here's another thing, like looking at because like you can't deny the role that occultism gave to the bunch of knuckleheads in Germany during World War II. I don't want to mention their name because we'll get flagged. But the point I'm trying to get at, that was a very blatant example of how far occult influence can go in government and stuff like that. That, like, if you ask me, if those nincompoops won, there would be more systematized study and research of occultism around the world because they believe in the power. But the thing is, thankfully they didn't. And since then, I haven't never really seen, well, who could be on top? Who could be calling the shots? How far can the occult go? Can the wizards go in the tree of power ever since then? Because like it was very blatant then. And the question would be like, has it ever gotten that far again in this lifetime afterwards? Or was that kind of like the highest it got?
You know, there's to go back to the tzaddikim, there's the mentality that these are the people that are just kind of keeping all the wheels turning behind the scenes, consciously or unconsciously. It doesn't have to be one person. It could be, they could be equally spread around the world and saying, okay, well, today I'm just going to turn this wheel a little bit, but that's going to turn something else, and then another guy somewhere else is going to see the effect and turn the next wheel.
So it's very Splinter Cell.
It could be completely decentralized. You never know. And again, you keep talking about people who don't even know that they're the ones acting.
So basically, it's like there's a certain level of anonymity because they don't even know what part of the machine they're part of, right?
Exactly. The machine keeps moving. The whole I don't know if you've had the vision of the machinery of the universe, the clockwork universe. It's really something because it's kind of that Matrix moment when he's looking down the hallway, another sci-fi reference, when he's looking down the hallway and everything's made of code. Yeah. It's it's like when you have the vision of Tiamat and everything around you is flesh and everything is pulsing and there's veins and nerve endings going everywhere, connecting everything, and it's all part of this giant meat machine. It's the same vision. We're all part of it. And it keeps rolling along. So I'm less concerned about the fascist dictatorship in a very large country at the moment, because it's also part of the machine.
It's kind of like white blood cells. They attack things. They attack infections. If you look at it on a dark work, light work perspective, it's bad because it's attacking, but it's actually doing its job.
Yeah, it's cleaning up. It's cleaning up the trash.
That's interesting because, like, I'd like to see the day where modern students of the occult and the esoteric stop villainizing dark work, because whether we like it or whether they want to admit it or not, it is completely necessary. And if they eliminated the darkness, if they eliminated dark work, the only thing that would happen would be chaos. I mean, things would just go to really quickly.
If everything was born and nothing died, the world would quickly fill up with garbage.
True.
I mean, if you take like the natural human aging, you don't want to live forever, but suppose you could live forever at the age of 22, when you're like at your physical peak, You know, you haven't started losing telomerase off the ends of your DNA. You haven't begun to age. You're still, you know, in your prime. But then after a while, you would just start collecting all of the psychic litter.
Yep.
Because you've seen cities rise and fall, countries come and go, whole trends of. You'd be like, oh man, I miss good music from the '80s. Really, from like 1980? No, from 1680. You know.
Yeah.
And you would quickly become your head would be so full of garbage that you couldn't even function.
Most likely, you just want to die already. That's the vampire's dilemma. That a lot of that they used to say in the old vampire fiction. That like one of the reasons the vampires are so weirded out is because they've been alive for so long that it's like they don't like life anymore. It's like I've seen it all, you know. And what else is there to see?
Or you get the ones that are desperately trying to be young, like you see these guys in their 50s that they're trying to dress like young punks with their little trilby hats and the cool shades and those, hey, what's up, my fellow youth? And you're like, I don't know, man, spare me.
Well, that's an interesting thing to look at too. But like going back to it though, remember that the Darkworkers, you could even consider them almost like the energetic equivalent, like I said, of the military. Then every country in this world has a military. Without it, there won't be security. And the minute people start realizing it's necessary and celebrating it for what it is the minute there's going to be harmony. I'm also not, although I make fun of a lot of light workers, I also don't discount their power. They're very good at healing. They're very good at growing. They're very good at compassion. It doesn't mean that the dark workers aren't, but then the light workers are just naturally inclined to that. They're good at peacetime. But remember, everyone, the cycle of yin and yang will constantly shift. There will be times of peace and there will be times of war.
Well, I used to have those meetings every week at the bookstore when we would have, the light workers would all meet at the new moon and the dark workers would meet at the full moon. But then on the weeks in between, we would have summits where they would sit down and coordinate their efforts. Like, well, okay, what are you trying to do for the city? Or we're trying to get this, we're trying to get that. And then what are the dark workers? Well, we want to get rid of this because this is causing this problem. And then they sit and they coordinate their efforts. Like, okay, well, what if we get rid of that, but then we can build this?
True.
And that way you're not working against each other. You're not in conflict. Everybody sits and, coordinates what they're doing. And we actually got a lot of good stuff done.
True. Very, very true. And coming from that perspective, both are necessary. Both are very helpful. And the only true path is the one that you feel is in resonance with you. So if you resonate as a dark worker, then there's nothing wrong with that. And if you resonate as a light worker, there's also nothing wrong with that. All right. Both these aspects.
Well, people can do both. It's just which one you have like a real talent for.
True. Very true. Yeah, well, with that, that pretty much wraps up tonight's episode. Wade, that was an interesting talk. We think of new things, we'll bring it up. But then if you want to know more about the deeper side of dark work, check out Richard Gavin's The Benighted Path. That's a real reader. I wish you can get your hands on that. But
owning your own shadow, that is purely from a psychological perspective. But it's an excellent read nonetheless, because when you're doing the abyss work, you're supposed to refrain from any spiritual or magical activity, and you're only using your logic.
Cool. We need to do more of a systematic approach to that topic soon, and hopefully soon we'll get BJ Swain on the show. I'd love to have him.
He's a good guy.
Looking forward to talking to that mind. Anyhow, thanks a lot, Wade. Don't leave. I've got something to talk to you about afterwards. Ending the episode. Good night, everyone.